To the US election, where some recent polling is showing a surprising new trend opening up. One leading US civil rights group, the NAACP, that's the National Association for the Advancement of Coloured People, that's what it stands for, has found out that 1 in 4 black voters under the age of 50 support Donald Trump ahead of next month's presidential election. It's leading to growing concern among Democrats that black voters are less enthused by their candidate compared to recent election, particularly black men. Kamala Harris has outlined a plan to give black men more economic opportunities. But the big question is, will it energise this key voting bloc? Dr. Chris Towler is a professor of political science at California State University and the director of the Black Voter Project, and our guest. Chris, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, thank you so much for having me this morning.
Now, just the caveat before we even begin, of course, not one demographic votes one way. People are diverse. But having said that, traditionally black voters do favour Democrats. What's happening for Kamala Harris?
Yeah, black voters do favor Democrats and have so ever since the 1970s. The partisan realignment after the civil rights movement really has kept black voters as what many call a safe constituency for the Democrats since then. I think what we're seeing right now is a lot of rhetoric and talk about black voters supporting Donald Trump that is coming from mainstream polling that really has small, inaccurate samples of black voters, but isn't backed up in the more rigorous polling of black voters that's specific to that community. And so a lot of the work that I've done has somewhat different findings from what the mainstream narrative is saying.
And just to clarify, are Democrats worried they'll turn to Trump or sit out the elections altogether?
I think the worry should be far more on people sitting out the election altogether. What I'm finding is that black voters are not turning to Trump at any higher rate than they have for past GOP presidents and candidates, with the Obama era as the exception. And I think that's where a lot of this sort of worry comes from, is that there's an expectation that because Harris is identified as possibly the second black president, black voters haven't swung to her at the same historic rates that they did for Obama. But we are also seeing black voters not voting for Trump at any higher rate than they have in the past, again, aside from the Obama years. And so there is some wonder as to what's going on. Trump has been sort of out there with some of the rhetoric against the black community and black immigrants recently. And so there is some surprise as to why black voters aren't swinging more towards Harris versus Trump, but it's not anything outside of the historical mean.
So it's more the case that black men are not swinging to her. We've seen Barack Obama on the campaign trail trying to deal with that. Is that helpful?
It has been helpful. Again, though, the really accurate polling of the black community shows that black men actually are supporting Harris versus Trump at the same levels as 2020. Recent polling has shown that really we should be much more worried about getting black men out and participating at higher levels than whether or not they're going to vote for Harris versus Trump. The most recent polling had black support for Trump among men at 18 to 20%, which is the exact same as in 2020. And so if we're saying historically we want black men to support the Democrats more, that's fine. But to say that black men are turning towards Trump at any significant rate than in the past is really inaccurate at this point.
Yesterday, the Vice President unveiled an economic plan aimed at black men. I mean, it was so specific, right?
Yeah.
I was a bit shocked, maybe I shouldn't be, but just how specific it was. I mean, her social media account, and I follow it, I'm sure lots of people do, was, this is what you get black men. Is that common to be that specific?
It is not, and I think it's coming from this outcry from the black community, again, of having a second black presidency that needs to now speak to black America in ways that some thought Obama's legacy did not do so. And so there was some hope that Obama would be able to speak to the black community more directly with policy initiatives than he did in his 8 years in tenure. And so there's really a push to get Harris and her administration to do something like that from the start. And I think that's where this is coming from. I think it's a great plan. It has a lot of policies in there that address concerns that the black community has been talking about for years now. I just wish that really she would have unveiled it or come up with it, if you will, sooner in the campaign cycle rather than a few weeks before the election. I think this is something that could have really helped drive registration and turnout weeks ago, right? But it's definitely something that's going to matter in the last stretch.
Do you think it's coming too late?
Possibly, I think that the campaign has to have had sort of momentum building for months, right? That's why we campaign all the way from back in April and May, right, to this point, to get people out and registered, to get the messages out there. The Harris campaign already sort of started from a disadvantage with her taking the nomination midway through the campaign. And so with that in mind, right, I think this is an important and great step to take right now. But I really, as someone who studies Black politics and wants to see as many Black voters out there and participating as much as possible, I really wish this would have been something that happened when Biden was still the nominee back at the very beginning of the campaign, to see how much it could have driven turnout, over the last 4 to 5 months.
It's been reported that Kamala Harris could soon be appearing on Joe Rogan's podcast. Now, he has a significant audience, especially among men. And we're seeing this from both campaigns, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris appearing on a lot of these podcasts that have these particular audiences that are targeted at particular groups. It seems to me like this is a real election that has rejected the mainstream media. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, that seems to be what's happening. I think a lot of that is coming from numbers that suggest that the unlikely voters, the voters at the margins right now, are not the voters who are watching sort of the everyday nightly news programs on television. They're voters who are getting their information from more non-traditional media, from podcasts and from sort of social media and the TikTok videos and YouTube videos. And so I think both campaigns have made a strategic turn in this direction. I know that's especially the case for Harris's appeal to the Black community, where a lot of the interviews she's done and the sort of outreach she's had on media for the Black community has again been targeting these non-traditional programs, these sort of radio programs that are now being listened to by the people who are not as engaged in politics. And so I agree. I think it's a very strategic push. And, when it's all said and done, we'll see if it actually pays off.
Thank you so much for joining us.